A large oil depot in Feodosia, which essentially serves as a major oil transshipment terminal, has been hit in the temporarily occupied Crimea. The fire has been raging for a second day, and the smoke plume is visible from space. Out of more than 30 fuel tanks, about 22 remain because this isn't the first time it's been hit. And it is specifically tankers from Russia's Shadow Fleet that refuel there, noted a representative of the Ukrainian Navy, Captain Second Rank Dmytro Plitenchuk. According to him, civilians are already having problems refueling their cars. They're going through a quest just to find a working gas station. According to him, not enough time has passed yet to objectively assess the results, and the outcomes of such attacks are measured not only by their immediate consequences at the site of the strike.
They are also measured by the future usability of these facilities. In other words, this should affect the supply balance, primarily for Russian troops in one of the directions, in terms of fuel, which of course is very important for the front.
Notably, the strike on the oil depot in Crimea happened on the eve of the birthday of the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. He turned 73 on October 7th. According to his press secretary Dmitry Peskov, Putin will spend it at his workplace. His plans include a Security Council meeting and international calls with birthday greetings from other world leaders. Let us recall that in temporarily occupied Crimea, one of the first major attacks on the Crimean Bridge by the Ukrainian armed forces took place on October 8, 2022. At that time, using a truck loaded with explosives, about 250 meters of the highway section collapsed and 7 tank cars of a freight train caught fire. Traffic on the bridge was completely halted, which was the first time this had happened since it was opened.
Crimea is a sacred place for every Vatnik and Z patriot. Crimea may not be a sandwich, but it has replaced the sandwich for them. They are willing to go hungry, as long as the cherished peninsula remains part of their wannabe empire.
I'll definitely go hungry too. For Putin, I stood firm, and I will absolutely keep standing strong, without hesitation.
Crimea is the main asset of the Putin regime. It's the sweet carrot dangled on a string in front of the herd of serfs, so that they mindlessly follow the pale leader into his alternative reality. Every true Putinist and patriot of the Russian Reich is convinced that Crimea belongs to Ukraine. Khrushchev gave it away illegally, and Mordor had every right to annex it, because Crimea is originally Russian territory.
On February 19th, in the year 1954, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, under Khrushchev's pressure, issued a decree transferring the Crimean region from the RSFSR to the Ukrainian SSR. As stated in the document, this decision was made taking into account the community, economy, and territorial proximity, and the close economic and cultural ties between the Crimean region and the Ukrainian SSR. However, this wording does not at all reflect the true reasons for the change in the peninsula's status.
The claim that Crimea has always been Russian is just as absurd as saying that Lenin invented Ukraine.
Well, all right, everything quieted down. No one remembers this the way they remember Crimea today. Wonderful. But we also try not to remember how Ukraine actually came together. Who created it anyway? Vladimir Ilyich Lenin.
Crimea has been connected to Russia for just a little over 100 years of disgrace, and that's out of a 3,000-year history. Let's answer the main question that distinguishes a man from an orc. Who's
Crimea!
Crimea returned to Russia. That's why you're here, right? Well, yes. Here comes the procession. Tell me why you think this is good or bad. Why is this good, in your opinion? Well,
Russia is, of course, certainly the best country in the world. That is undoubtedly why the world is always for Russia.
I see. Do you know anything about Crimea? Well,
From the
12th to the 6th century BC, the Cimmerians, Scythians, and Tauri lived in Crimea. We haven't heard of the Scythians playing the balalaika or eating pancakes off a shovel. They were all Iranian-speaking peoples. So historically, Crimea is Iranian land. That's why it's not surprising that Iran still doesn't recognize Crimea as Russian, even though it's an ally of Muscovy.
Iran promises to continue supplying Iranian drones and missiles to the Russian Federation, with the aim of using them in the war against Ukraine. This is reported by The Times. Despite all this, Iran refused to recognize Crimea and other Ukrainian territories as part of Russia. In fact, the agreement was concluded on Iran's terms. That is, Russia was forced to sign the agreement, and it's unlikely that Masoud Pezeshkian will send Iranian soldiers to fight in the war against Ukraine.
Maybe after the Scythians, Crimea became Russian? Of course not. In the 7th century BC, Greek colonists replaced the Scythians. They built city-states like Chersonesus, Feodosia, Pantikapaeum, and hundreds of other settlements. In fact, the Crimea as we know it was created by the Hellenes. So it turns out that Crimea has always been Greek.
This is definitely Sparta.
And the Russians, on the contrary, destroy what civilized people have built. During the occupation of the peninsula, the orcs have turned the historical Greek heritage into some kind of a hideous shopping mall on the outskirts of Chelyabinsk. At the entrance to Chersonesus, there are now Greek letters displayed, readable in Cyrillic, but making absolutely no sense in Greek. What is this word? Its tackiness elevated to an absolute. Socrates is turning in his grave. The Russian world destroys not only the present and the future, but also the past. In
that same evening, unidentified people in camouflage seized the Ukrtelecom building and cut all the wires. They seized the Crimean television and radio company, and that's far from the whole list. Armed to the teeth, people are standing near all Ukrainian military bases and units, saying they've come to protect our soldiers.
maybe after the Greeks, the Russians appeared in Crimea. Again, no. In 63 BC, Crimea was conquered by the Roman Empire, that very same Western world. Crimea joined NATO before the people of Russia even learned to walk on two legs. The Romans ruled Crimea for about 400 years. Just so you understand, Russia only controlled the peninsula for 170 years. So historically, Crimea is Italian, considering that the ancestors of Celentano also owned part of Crimea during the Renaissance in the 14th and 15th centuries. The Genoese built a fortress in the city of Sudak and ruled there for 205 years. So in total, Crimea was Italian. 600 years.
It's not your fault.
During the Italian period, culture, trade, and winemaking flourished on the peninsula, while in Moscow at that time, they were developing impalement, torture, and the art of playing spoons until you passed out. Volkhov was under our rule, but the access to the sea was theirs. After the Romans, the Goths came to Crimea. And the Goths are Germans. So, that means it's originally German territory. And it turns out, by Russian logic, Hitler was right when he came to take it back. After the Goths, Crimea once again passed to the Greeks from Byzantium, and then it was seized by the people of Kiev. Grand Prince Sviatoslav Igorovich stormed onto the peninsula with both feet, and Vladimir Sviatoslavich consolidated the influence of the Pechersk residents over Crimea.
By law, and by conscience and by history, Crimea, of course, certainly belongs to Ukraine. President Lukava, however, keeps completely quiet about the important fact that Prince Vladimir was, in fact, the Prince of Kiev. And he baptized the Kievan Rus first and foremost. Because when you compare it to Kiev, which was first mentioned in the historical records in the year 1147, Moscow isn't even Kiev's great-granddaughter. It's actually more like a great-great-granddaughter.
Kiev ruled Crimea for about 200 years. That's already longer than Moscow did. After that, the Golden Horde controlled Crimea, and it was originally Mongolian. Then the Golden Horde collapsed, as all empires do, and Crimea became Tatar. And only at the end of the 18th century was Tavrida temporarily occupied by Russia. And all this time, the pseudo-empire carried out genocide against the local peoples who had truly lived there for centuries.
At dawn on May 18th, in the year 1944, officers of the Soviet NKVD broke into the homes of Crimean Tatars all across the region of Crimea, accused them of treason and collaboration with the Nazis, and then forcibly deported them to distant places such as the Urals, Siberia, and Central Asia. The deported were given anywhere from a few minutes to half an hour to pack their things.
At the beginning of the 20th century, Kyiv once again became the capital of Crimea. In 1917, the peninsula became part of the Ukrainian People's Republic. On October 12, 1917, the Black Sea Fleet raised Ukrainian flags, and from 1954, Crimea became Ukrainian forever. And this saved the peninsula from extinction and devastation. Until 1954, under Russian administration, Crimea was brought to a catastrophic state. It was the most depressed region. After the deportations of Tatars, Bulgarians, Armenians, and Greeks, the land was left empty and populated with peasants in bast shoes. But Stalinist colonizers from the northern backwaters were unable to manage the economy in the southern region. The area of crops in Crimea decreased by 70,000 hectares compared to 1940. Only 41,000 hectares of land were irrigated. In Moscow, more area is irrigated for elevators in a year than the Russians managed in Crimea. And 3,000 years ago, the Greeks did this with ease. And by 1954, out of 30 collective farms, only 3 managed to sow the fields and harvest at all. The peninsula was literally dying out. Even 10 years after the end of World War II, Crimea lay in ruins. Nobody restored it.
Of the 6,000 pre-war buildings in Sevastopol, only approximately 7 more or less remain standing. This is the Cathedral of the Intercession, the Kreshitsky Museum.
Take a look at the occupied Donbass, and it will soon become clear why Crimea has degraded.
Let me now. I'll explain what this is lying here. These aren't just little bags. It's being reported that at 1 Lyashenko Street, people are throwing bags of feces out the window in the entranceway.
The newly arrived Crimeans, these are the ones who in 2014 all wanted to return to their native harbor, had no idea in their hearts what to do or how to survive in an unfamiliar land. It turned out that most of the newcomers saw grapes and corn for the first time in their lives. All they had seen before were wolves, wolf holes, and wolf berries.
What is the name of this country?
Crimea! Oh Lord, please help me!
Crimea needed to be saved urgently, and only Ukrainians could do this. That's why in 1954, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR unanimously approved the decision to transfer Crimea to Ukraine. Not Khrushchev in a drunken stupor, as the Z supporters like to shout, but the entire Soviet leadership unanimously.
I think there will be no objections. When Khrushchev asked his question, Bulganin, Mikoyan, Kirichenko, Kaganovich, and others responded with exclamations. That's right, accept it, transfer it.
The official reason for the transfer was the shared economy, territorial proximity, and cultural ties. In other words, even the Soviets admitted that Crimea is much closer to Ukraine than to Russia.
That's a strong statement, and
As soon as Crimea became part of Ukraine, the situation immediately began to improve dramatically. It was the Ukrainians who turned the peninsula into what Russians call the Russian Pearl.
In the month of February, in the year 1957, the City Party Committee officially reported the completion of Sevastopol's restoration. 700,000 square meters of housing were built in the city, more than before the war.
Ukraine literally raised the peninsula from ruins. The North Crimean Canal from the Dnipro was built, and it was completed already in independent Ukraine. Kyiv developed agriculture and created resort infrastructure. Ukrainians built housing, roads, hospitals, schools, ports, hotels, theaters, bus stations, and boarding houses in Crimea, and also restored architectural monuments. And most importantly, the Russians who moved there were allowed to feel at home in Crimea. They could speak their own language, watch Kiselyov, and even keep their military fleet there. And for this, the Russians repaid with treacherous aggression.
I really don't want to leave Crimea or Alushka. It's so great here.
The annexation of Crimea was Moscow's fatal mistake. It was with the seizure of Crimea that the real collapse of the pseudo-empire began. The annexation of Crimea dragged Russia into a war it cannot win. And the very fact of seizing someone else's territory under the slogan of so-called self-determination of the Crimean people gave impetus to national liberation movements within Russia itself. On top of that, since 2014, the Russian Federation has had no internationally recognized borders. And if there are no borders, there is no state.
The demilitarization of the occupied Ukrainian peninsula has now been set in motion. With the help of long-range drones, naval and FPV drones, the Ukrainian armed forces are destroying both the enemy's infrastructure and military equipment.
I really don't want to leave Crimea because of the puddles. It's so great here.
Special emphasis is placed on the air defense and radar systems of the occupiers in Crimea. Thanks to the successful work of Ukrainian specialists, Russian troops on the peninsula remain blind. At the same time, the Ukrainian arsenal is steadily expanding. Jet-powered strike drones, cruise missiles, and heavy underwater drones.
Somehow it is necessary to put this war into a kind of stalemate in order to shift it. It is necessary to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and aviation. That is why these are needed. And I am not even mentioning the necessity of striking at the enterprises of the military-industrial complex and Russia's energy system.
Where is the Ukrainian armed forces aiming? What weapons does Ukraine use to strike at the personnel and facilities of the occupiers in Crimea? About this and more, coming up in the arsenal. Both aerial and maritime drones are actively used in strikes on Crimea. Ukrainian unmanned boats have undergone significant modernization during the war. At first, the boats were used against the heavy ships of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Then, at the end of 2024, the Magura V-5, using an R-73 missile, shot down a military helicopter for the first time in history. And in May 2025, Ukrainian naval drones also, for the first time in history, used AIM-9 missiles to shoot down 2 Russian Su-30 fighter jets. In 2025, the GUR presented a new version of the boat, the Magura V-7. The technical specifications of the drone are as follows. Maximum operational range, 1,000 kilometers. Speed, 72 kilometers per hour. Drone weight, 3,400 kilograms. Payload, 640 kilograms. In addition to strike and reconnaissance functions, the new naval drones are also used as FPV carriers.
The longer the war goes on, as you may notice, the higher and more advanced the level of weaponry and military equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine becomes. Therefore, as they say, the longer this ongoing war lasts, the more significant and substantial the losses that Russia will inevitably suffer.
The Ukrainian GUR is developing a fleet of naval drones. Most of this fleet will consist of unmanned platforms for launching kamikaze strike drones. With the help of FPV drones, fighters strike both ground and highly maneuverable surface targets. Using FPV drones, operators and the special unit Primary of the Ukrainian GUR-MO destroyed 2 Russian B-12 Chaika anti-submarine amphibious aircraft, which are specifically carriers of nuclear weapons. The cost-effectiveness ratio of such operations is off the charts. It's overwhelming. Helicopters worth $15 million were taken out by drones costing just a few $1,000s. The same applies to the B-12 aircraft and the radar system.
Strikes on depots, strikes on logistics routes, that is, attacks on these important targets to disrupt supply lines, key transportation hubs and important seaports are being targeted. In addition, there are also strikes on various defense industry enterprises. This is considered a necessary measure, primarily because many of these facilities are located within the operational range of even our most basic and simplest drones. These actions are taken to ensure that the enemy's ability to transport supplies and produce military equipment is significantly reduced. And strikes on enterprises of the fuel industry. That is, fuel producers, and as is well known, oil is the lifeblood of war.
Ukrainian engineers also haven't forgotten about Putin's symbolic stronghold, the Crimean Bridge. The bridge is regularly closed due to the threat of drone attacks. The bridge has been struck multiple times, both with drones and through special operations. Now, a new threat looms over the bridge. Ukrainian developers have unveiled the large Toloka Sea drone for the first time at the Defense Tech World 2025 exhibition in Lviv. The largest drone in the TLK 1000 family has the following specifications. Range of engagement 2,000 kilometers. Autonomy up to 60 days. Warhead up to 5,000 kilograms. Speed up to 30 kilometers per hour. Length 12 meters. Hull diameter 1.5 meters. The drone is equipped with a hybrid diesel-electric engine. This unmanned vehicle is capable of performing several functions at once. It can combat Russian submarines, strike strategic targets, specifically the Crimean Bridge, and lay mines in ports to prevent enemy ships from entering the sea. As of today, Ukraine, regardless of Allied supplies, is striking occupied Crimea with domestically produced weapons. All kinds of occupier targets on the peninsula are being targeted by Ukrainian missiles and drones. For example, just recently, the Ukrainian armed forces successfully struck a gathering of FSB officers at the Foros Sanatorium with drones, a place where Putin himself has vacationed multiple times in the past. As a result of the Ukrainian drone attack, several high-ranking individuals were killed, FSB officers. 12 patients from Foros in Crimea have been hospitalized at the Yalta FMBA Medical Center. According to the center, 4 of them are in serious condition and 7 are in moderate condition. As a result of the attack that occurred on Foros, 3 people were tragically killed. Given the fact that this is an FSB departmental sanatorium, where a special event was taking place at the time of the attack, the identities of both the deceased and the injured individuals are not being disclosed at this time. In strikes on such facilities and buildings, Ukraine uses its own analogs of Shahed drones. Jet-powered drones like Polyanitsia and Barts, which have higher speed and a warhead.
One moment, if the Karjetas carry 12 to 15 kilograms of explosives, this one will carry more than 100 kilograms, maybe even up to 200 kilograms. 4 Shaheds, this one is twice as fast as a Shahed. Here, the speed of the Polyanitsia, well, according to estimates, 350 to 400 kilometers per hour, twice as much as a Shahed. A Shahed has 50 kilograms, so this is twice, even more. Payload capacity depends on the square of the speed, lift force. The square of the speed. If the speed is twice as high, the load is 4 times greater. So these drones will carry serious charges that won't just pierce the roofs of factories, but will collapse them inward onto the workshops.
Ukraine is also developing its own missile program. While ballistic missile tests are still ongoing, new cruise missiles are already being actively used on the battlefield. The long-range Neptune and Flamingo. The Flamingo cruise missile can reach even the most remote parts of the peninsula. This Ukrainian bird can also be used to strike the Crimean Bridge, since it has an impressive warhead for a cruise missile, 1,000 kilograms in total weight.
Usually, the warhead of a modern cruise missile typically weighs about 450 kilograms, but at most, it can reach up to 500 kilograms. As a rule, almost all missiles have a 450 kilogram warhead. What does a 1-ton warhead actually provide? If it successfully strikes a target, such as, for example, a major and significant industrial facility, then 2 such missiles will be able to completely disable it for at least a year. That is, there will be a single crater about 20 meters in diameter.
That's all for now. Don't forget to write in the comments which types of weapons you'd like to learn more about. Like this video and, of course, subscribe to our Arsenal channel. The link is in the description below the video.